The story begins on a crisp autumn morning in the Cascade Mountains of Washington State, a place where the forest seems endless and the fog clings to the trees like a living thing. Ethan Miller, a 32-year-old experienced hiker, had planned this solo weekend trip for months. He worked as a software engineer in Seattle, quiet and methodical, and hiking had always been his way to escape the noise of the world. Ethan had shared his hiking plans with a few friends, not because he expected anything to go wrong, but out of routine caution. He sent a quick message in the group chat, going up to Cascade Ridge for the weekend, back by Sunday evening. A few friends sent thumbs-up emojis. Nothing unusual. Cascade Ridge wasn't a beginner's trail. It was a rugged path stretching through dense forest, crossing streams, climbing ridges with narrow ledges. But Ethan wasn't a beginner either. Over the last 5 years, he'd completed several solo hikes, sometimes going completely off the grid for days. His friends often joked that if anyone could survive in the woods alone, it was him. He parked his car at the small gravel lot near the trailhead around 9 a.m. Security cameras at the entrance captured him adjusting his backpack straps, locking his car, and heading toward the trail with a confident stride. It was supposed to be a quiet, peaceful weekend in nature, the kind of escape he craved after weeks of long coding sessions and endless Zoom meetings. The first part of the trail was serene. Red and orange leaves carpeted the ground. The sound of rushing water echoed from a stream nearby. Ethan recorded a short voice note on his phone, something he often did on hikes, describing the scenery. The air's cold but perfect. No one else around. Feels like the forest is mine. As he climbed deeper into the wilderness, the trail narrowed. Cell service became weaker. His GPS signal flickered but didn't fully disappear. By early afternoon, the sun was beginning its slow descent behind the peaks. He reached a point known to hikers as Eagle's Spine, a narrow ridge with a breathtaking view of the valley. He took a photo there, his last Instagram story, a foggy horizon, and the caption, "Worth every step." That night, Ethan set up camp near a clearing not far from the ridge. It wasn't an official campsite, but experienced hikers often used it. He boiled water, made a simple meal, and read a few chapters of a paperback thriller he always carried on hikes. The forest around him was quiet, except for the wind moving through the branches. But then something shifted. Around 11:30 p.m., he recorded another short audio on his phone. This one different. The tone in his voice was more alert, maybe even uneasy. "There's something moving out there, probably just deer." The message was never sent. His phone remained in airplane mode. The following morning, neighbors at the trailhead parking lot, 2 other hikers, noticed Ethan's car still there. That wasn't strange yet. Many hikers took more than one night. But what no one knew then was that, just after noon that day, Ethan would make a chilling emergency call to 911. In the call, his voice was breathless, panicked but trying to stay calm. I don't know where I am exactly. I left the ridge about 2 hours ago. My GPS stopped working. I think someone's been following me." He mentioned hearing footsteps behind him, seeing movement in the fog. The operator tried to keep him calm, guiding him to describe landmarks. But then the line suddenly cut out. No signal, no further contact. Within hours, a search and rescue team was mobilized. It wasn't the first time someone got lost in those mountains. But what they would find when they arrived near Eagle's Spine would become one of the most unsettling missing persons cases in the region's history. His car remained at the trailhead. His phone's last ping was somewhere along a poorly marked ridge path. The temperature was dropping fast, and in the woods the wind carried an eerie silence, as if the forest itself had swallowed him whole. He called for help, but when help came, there was nothing left except his pack and something no one could explain. When the 911 call disconnected that evening, dispatchers immediately tried to reconnect. The phone rang 3 times before it went silent. After that, it stopped responding altogether, either turned off, dead battery, or out of range. At first, the emergency operator assumed it might be a common case of temporary loss of signal in mountainous terrain. Dozens of hikers each year called from the Cascades, only to reconnect a few minutes later once they found a clearing. But by 7 p.m., with no further contact, the situation was logged as possible distress, overdue hiker. The Skamania County Search and Rescue Unit was notified and mobilized before dawn the next morning. Their command post was set up near the Maple Ridge trailhead, beside Ethan's parked Subaru. The car was neat, almost too neat. Inside were a pair of sunglasses, a thermos half full of coffee, and his wallet. Nothing suggested panic or foul play. He had clearly parked expecting to return in a day or two. The first team, composed of 2 officers, 3 volunteers, and a trained search dog named Rex, started up the trail at sunrise. The air was cold and heavy with mist. Frost clung to the pine needles, and the forest was unnervingly quiet. Even the birds seemed absent. Every few hundred feet, one of the rescuers would stop and shout Ethan's name. "Ethan Miller, search and rescue. If you can hear us, call out." No answer came, only echoes. By mid-morning, they reached the point where the couple had last seen him the day before, a small wooden bridge crossing a narrow creek. Beyond it, the trail split. One side continued uphill toward the lake, the other dipped into a lower ravine. GPS data from Ethan's phone, when recovered, would later show his final location, ping somewhere between those 2 routes, as if he had gone back and forth several times before disappearing completely. The first major clue was found at 11:23 a.m. Lying beneath a fallen log, partially covered by leaves, was Ethan's blue water bottle. Nearby were footprints, clearly his, deep, consistent, as if he'd been pacing or circling the area. Then, about 50 yards farther up the hill, a member of the team spotted the backpack. It wasn't torn or dumped or scattered. It was sitting upright, carefully placed against a tree. Inside were Ethan's jacket, flashlight, a few snacks, and the GPS beacon. Turned off. That detail struck investigators as strange. Ethan was known to be cautious. He wouldn't have disabled his main safety device willingly. But the strangest discovery came next. A cluster of footprints encircling the area around the backpack. Some were Ethan's. The tread of his hiking boots matched perfectly. But others were odd. The ground was soft and damp, and the impressions seemed distorted, longer, wider, and missing the distinct pattern of any recognizable shoe sole. At first, rescuers assumed they were just smudges or erosion caused by water runoff. Still, a few members noted that the marks seemed too deliberate, as if something had stood there, close to Ethan, before both vanished. When officers expanded their search grid, they began finding fragments of disturbed earth, branches broken at unnatural angles, moss torn from trees, and a strange pattern of drag marks near the base of a rock formation. The dog, Rex, caught Ethan's scent, but abruptly lost it near that same spot, circling in confusion before whining and backing away. His handler later testified that the dog reacted like it hit an invisible wall, one moment tracking strongly, the next completely blank. By that evening, the area was crawling with personnel, local deputies, search volunteers, drones, and a helicopter from the Washington State Patrol. They swept the nearby ridges with thermal imaging, searching for heat signatures. Nothing. The forest was cold and still, as if nothing alive had passed through it in days. When Lauren Miller arrived at the scene around sunset, she was pale and silent. She clutched a photo of her brother from a family trip to Mount Rainier, smiling, carefree, with a camera slung around his neck. "He wouldn't just wander off," she told Detective Mark Holbrook, who was overseeing the case. "He knows these woods better than anyone. Something happened to him out there." The detective nodded grimly. By then, he'd seen dozens of missing persons cases, but something about this one felt off. The neatness of the backpack, the clear footprints ending abruptly, the strange patterns in the soil, none of it aligned with a simple accident or fall. That night, the search was suspended due to dropping temperatures. The fog rolled in thick again, swallowing the trees. The only lights were the flashing strobes from the rescue trucks and the occasional flicker of a flashlight beam moving through the mist. Volunteers warmed their hands by portable heaters, whispering theories: mountain lion, hidden ravine, freak accident. But none of those explanations fit with the 911 call. Ethan had sounded disoriented, yes, but calm. There had been no hint of immediate danger, no panic in his voice. The next morning brought a new piece of evidence: his phone. It was found resting on a flat stone roughly a quarter-mile from the backpack. The screen was cracked, the battery dead, but the last GPS ping matched the timestamp of his 911 call. Forensics later confirmed there were no additional calls or texts after that point. No signs of struggle, no photos, no voice recordings. It was as if Ethan had deliberately set it down and walked away. Over the next 3 days, search teams combed nearly 40 square miles of forest. They found broken branches and faint prints leading to nowhere. Drones captured hundreds of images, and yet nothing pointed to where he might have gone. A professional tracker brought in from Oregon noted that the terrain around the backpack suggested a second set of movements not consistent with human stride patterns. He couldn't explain what made them, only that they were off. By the end of the week, the official tone shifted from rescue to recovery. Local news outlets began covering the story, dubbing it the vanishing hiker mystery. Interviews with friends and co-workers described Ethan as grounded, stable, and disciplined. No history of mental illness, no reason to run away. Still, whispers spread. Some said he'd planned to fake his death. Others insisted the forest had taken him, that there were things deep in the Cascades that didn't want to be found. When the command post finally packed up on the 7th day, they left behind only markers, orange ribbons fluttering from branches, and a single unanswered question that haunted everyone who'd been there. How could a man vanish less than a mile from a marked trail, surrounded by dozens of rescuers, leaving behind only his gear and footprints that didn't make sense? By the time the search team reached the coordinates, dusk had already swallowed most of the Sierra Nevada range. The sky above the jagged peaks was painted in a strange mix of ash gray and violet, the kind of color that makes the world look suspended between dream and nightmare. The wind hissed between the pines, dry and sharp, carrying with it a faint echo, something that could have been a whisper or a warning. It had been nearly 6 hours since Aaron Vale's last phone call to emergency services. The dispatcher's log still haunted everyone involved. "I see a light. Someone's coming toward me. No, wait, it's not." The line cut off abruptly. The call had pinged between 3 different cell towers, creating a confusing map of his last known location, as if Aaron had been moving while the call was still connected. The rescue team, 5 search and rescue specialists and a K-9 unit, split into pairs to cover more ground. The terrain was uneven, scattered with jagged rocks and thick underbrush. Every step crunched like breaking bones underfoot. Their flashlights carved thin tunnels of light through the darkness, illuminating glimpses of motion, tree branches, shadows, sometimes just mist that seemed to shift and curl like smoke. Then one of them saw it. A hat, navy blue, lying on a flat stone near the edge of a cliff. The same hat Aaron wore in his hiking photos. A few feet away, nestled between 2 boulders, was his backpack. It wasn't torn or scattered. Everything inside was neatly packed: a rain jacket, a few protein bars, half a bottle of water, and his phone, the battery removed. It looked less like something left behind in panic, and more like something placed there deliberately. The dog caught a scent and led the team uphill, toward a narrow ridge that overlooked the valley. For a few minutes the trail was clear. Footprints, human, heading straight toward the ridgeline. But then the dog froze, hackles raised. It let out a low growl and began circling, sniffing the ground, then looking out into the darkness as if it saw something moving there. Maybe an animal, one rescuer said. But another swore he heard a sound, a sharp cry, distant but human. It echoed once, then vanished completely. The radios crackled, but no one responded. When they reached the ridge, they found something even stranger. The footprints they had been following split into several directions, looping and intersecting, as if multiple people had walked there, or one person had gone in circles over and over again. But the spacing between the prints was inconsistent, too long for a normal stride, too short for running. It didn't make sense. Maybe he was delirious, someone suggested quietly. But that didn't explain why some of the prints faced backward. The air grew colder, unnaturally cold. Breath came out in visible clouds, and then the dog began whining, backing away, tail tucked low. It refused to move forward. The handler tried to coax it, but the animal only whimpered louder, eyes fixed on something in the darkness just beyond the beam of the flashlight. When they turned their lights in that direction, there was nothing. Just rocks, trees, the endless stretch of the mountain night. But when one rescuer took a photo to mark the spot, his camera flash revealed something behind the tree line, a faint, almost transparent silhouette, human-shaped, standing still, watching. They rushed toward it, lights blazing, but there was no one there, only a faint metallic smell in the air. And at their feet, something small glimmered under the flashlight beam. It was Aaron's GPS beacon. Turned off. Battery drained completely. But the device had been deliberately wrapped in layers of cloth, as if someone didn't want it to send a signal. No one said a word. The silence pressed on them, thick and heavy. Somewhere down the slope, the wind howled again, a long, low sound that almost formed words. When they played back the recording later, one of the rescuers noticed something beneath the noise of the storm. A faint voice caught by the mic on the camera. It wasn't the wind. It was whispering, almost clearly. "Don't follow me." And just like that, Aaron Vale, the man who called for help, was gone. The mountain had taken him, and it wasn't giving him back. The following morning, the Sierra Nevada range looked deceptively calm. The storm had rolled east overnight, leaving behind a landscape washed in pale sunlight, all clean air and glittering frost. To an outsider, it was the picture of serenity. But for the search team, that silence felt wrong, like the mountain itself was holding its breath. By 7 a.m., reinforcements had arrived. 12 additional rescuers, 2 drones, and a tracking specialist from the state police. The initial team gathered at the base camp, their faces drawn and pale. They had all heard the recording from the night before, the whisper that sounded like, "Don't follow me." No one could explain it, and no one wanted to. The command lead, Captain Reyes, stood over a large topo map spread on the hood of a truck. The red pins marked the search radius. "We sweep in expanding sectors," he said. "No one goes off radio. No one moves alone. Vale's signal puts him here." He tapped the ridge with a gloved finger. "But the trail goes cold halfway down the western face." A volunteer asked if there was any chance Aaron had survived the night. Reyes hesitated before answering. Temperatures dropped below freezing, without gear or a heat source. He didn't finish the sentence. The first drone lifted off, buzzing high above the treetops. From the control tablet, its camera fed back a perfect aerial view, endless green and gray, broken by streaks of snow. But within 10 minutes, the operator frowned. "Signal interference," he said. Static rippled across the screen. "Something's jamming the frequency." Reyes looked up toward the mountain's peak, a dark, jagged tooth against the morning sky. "Keep it running as long as it holds." By noon, the team reached the area where Aaron's pack had been found. It looked just as they'd left it, untouched. But the footprints from last night were gone, erased completely. The ground, which had been muddy and soft, was now frozen solid. It was as if the mountain had healed itself overnight. One rescuer knelt and brushed away frost near the boulders. "Captain, you need to see this." Beneath the thin layer of ice, something dark and smooth glinted in the sunlight. A circle of polished stone, half buried. It wasn't natural, it looked carved, and in its center there was a faint groove, a spiral etched into the rock. They marked the location and moved on, unease growing with every step. About 2 hours later, one of the volunteers radioed in. "Base, this is Team C. I don't know what we've got. You need to come see this." When the others arrived, they found the volunteer standing at the edge of a shallow ravine. At the bottom was a clearing, and in that clearing a circle of stones. Some large, some small, all arranged carefully, deliberately. It looked like some kind of ritual site. Inside the circle lay a torn piece of fabric, a hiking jacket, shredded but still recognizable. The tag was intact, A. Vale. Reyes crouched to examine it. The edges weren't frayed. They were sliced, clean and straight, as though cut with a knife. "Wildlife didn't do this," he muttered. They took photos, flagged the area, and continued upward toward the ridge. As they climbed, radio contact grew worse. Static drowned out their voices, and sometimes there were bursts of sound that didn't belong. A low hum, then a series of clicks, like Morse code. One of the searchers tried to record it, but the noise would vanish every time someone pressed record. Then came the first scream. It echoed through the valley, distant but unmistakable, a human voice crying for help. Everyone froze. The sound came from the west, just beyond the ridge. Reyes shouted coordinates, and 2 teams broke off to investigate. They reached the location within 15 minutes. Nothing. No one. Just an empty slope and the wind tearing through the trees. But as they turned to leave, a volunteer noticed something scratched into the bark of a nearby pine. 3 words, carved crudely, unevenly. "I found them." The letters looked fresh. The wood beneath was still pale and wet. "Found who?" someone whispered. That night, when they reviewed the body cam footage, something else appeared, something no one had seen in the moment. As the flashlight passed over the tree, a faint shape flickered in the corner of the frame. A face, just behind the team. Pale, motionless, watching. The timestamp showed exactly 3:33 p.m. From that point forward, the mountain changed. The wind no longer sounded like mere wind. It whispered words that almost formed syllables. Compass needles spun aimlessly. Batteries drained twice as fast as normal. And though everyone swore they were following their GPS path, somehow each team kept looping back to the same spot, the clearing with the circle of stones. It didn't matter which direction they took. The mountain led them back every time. By sunset, Captain Reyes called for an evacuation. The teams descended in silence, the forest around them darkening with unnatural speed. But when they reached base camp, one of the rescuers was missing. His name was Ellis Grady, 28 years old, 2nd year on the unit. His radio was still on, transmitting a steady hiss of static. They tried calling his name. Nothing. Then, just before midnight, his radio crackled to life. "Found him," a voice said. Calm, distant, almost hollow. But when Reyes checked the channel log, the transmission hadn't come from any registered device. It came from Aaron Vale's phone, the one they'd found in his backpack, still turned off. Back at base camp, the tension was almost tangible, a physical weight pressing on everyone's chest. The team gathered around the command tent, the radio still crackling with that faint, intermittent hiss. The words, "found him," replayed in their minds like a bad echo. Captain Reyes stared at the phone lying on the table. Aaron Vale's phone. The screen was dead, the battery indicator flatlined. He had personally checked it an hour ago. It couldn't have transmitted anything. Yet the log didn't lie. The signal originated from the same coordinates as the missing hiker's last known location. Could it be interference? One volunteer asked, voice trembling. Reyes shook his head slowly. No, that was a clean transmission. Someone, or something, spoke through this frequency. Outside, the forest was unnervingly quiet. No insects, no wind. Even the night birds had gone still. Only the low hum of the generator and the occasional crackle of the radio filled the silence. The tech operator, Morales, leaned over the comms unit. There's a pattern, she said. Listen to the static. They turned up the volume. Beneath the white noise, there was a rhythm. 3 short bursts, a pause, then 2 long. Morse? Reyes asked. Morales nodded, quickly scribbling the translation. When she looked up, her face had gone pale. It says, "Help me." The room went silent. For the next several minutes, they listened, recording every fluctuation in the static. The signal came and went like breathing, faint, labored, desperate. Sometimes, in between the bursts, there was the faintest trace of a voice, as if someone were trying to speak through layers of interference. Around 2:30 a.m., Morales adjusted the antenna to narrow the signal's direction. "It's coming from higher up," she said, "somewhere near that ridge we mapped earlier." Reyes made the decision instantly. "We go at first light." The morning brought an eerie kind of clarity, the sky washed in gold, the snow glittering under a cold sun. The team moved in a tight formation, 6 members this time, all linked by radio. Their breath fogged in the thin air. Every crunch of snow sounded like a scream in the stillness. As they climbed, the static returned, faint at first, then louder, pulsing through the earpieces. The pattern repeated, "Help me." At one point, one of the younger volunteers, Jessup, froze. "Captain," he whispered, "I think I hear singing." Reyes gestured for silence. Through the wind, faint and distant, there was something, a sound that almost resembled a melody. Low, slow, drawn out. It echoed off the cliffs, impossible to tell where it came from. They followed it uphill until they reached a narrow pass. There, half buried in the snow, was a makeshift shelter made of branches and stones. Inside, the remnants of a small fire, ashes still warm. "Someone's been here recently," Reyes said. They searched the site. No footprints led away, but there was something else, a small metal flask lying near the ashes. Scratched into its side were the initials E.G. Ellis Grady. Morales swallowed hard. "Captain, that's—" "I know," Reyes cut her off. "Tag it. We keep moving." They pushed deeper into the pass where the air grew colder and the shadows thicker. The static in their radios intensified until it drowned out all other sound. Then, abruptly, it stopped. "Signal's gone," Morales said. They emerged into a clearing. It was the same one from before, the circle of stones, now half covered in snow. Only this time, something new was there. In the center of the circle stood a tree, gnarled, blackened, as though struck by lightning, and nailed to its trunk was a piece of torn fabric. Red. Reyes approached carefully, his boots crunching in the frost. The fabric was a section of a jacket sleeve, still damp. When he turned it over, his stomach twisted. Written in dirt, or blood, were 3 words. "He's not human." The team stood frozen, unable to speak. The message looked hastily scrawled, but recent. "Could be Ellis," Morales whispered. "Or Vale." Before Reyes could respond, the radios came alive again. Not with static this time, but a voice. "Aaron Vale to base," it said clearly. "I can see you." Everyone froze. Reyes slowly lifted his mic. "Aaron, this is Captain Reyes. Where are you? Are you hurt?" Silence. Then the voice came again, slightly distorted, like two versions overlapping. "I can see you. Don't move." They spun around, scanning the tree line. Nothing. Then Jessup pointed. "Captain, up there." On the ridge above, maybe 50 feet away, a figure stood motionless among the rocks. Dressed in a dark hiking jacket, a hood pulled low. It looked exactly like Aaron Vale. "Stay where you are," Reyes shouted. "We're coming to you." But the figure didn't move. It just raised one arm, not to wave, but to point directly at them. Then, in the space of a blink, it was gone. Reyes and Morales scrambled up the slope, snow sliding under their boots. When they reached the spot, there were no footprints, no sign of anyone. Only one thing remained, a second spiral carved into the rock, identical to the one they'd found near the boulders days earlier. Reyes reached out to touch it, and the radio screamed. A blast of static so loud everyone ripped off their headsets. Through the noise came that same distorted voice, whispering over and over, "You shouldn't have come back." Then silence. When the static finally faded, Morales glanced down at her radio. The signal frequency had changed on its own. The screen flickered, letters rearranging to form two words, e.g. connected. She looked up at Reyes, her face pale as snow. "Captain, Ellis is still transmitting." He frowned. "From where?" Morales stared at the screen, trembling. "From right here." Reyes turned slowly. Behind them, just inside the tree line, stood another figure, this one closer. The same dark jacket, same stance. But when it stepped forward into the light, they saw its face. It was Ellis Grady, or what looked like him. His skin was ashen, eyes hollow, lips moving soundlessly. He lifted his hand as if trying to speak, but the only thing that came through the radio was static, whispering the same phrase again and again. "Help me." And when they blinked, he was gone. The only thing left behind were footprints leading deeper into the mountains. They weren't human. By the next morning, the mountain was wrapped in mist, so thick it seemed alive, swirling and moving against the wind. Captain Reyes barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Ellis's pale face flickering in the beam of his flashlight. The team's morale was breaking. Jessup refused to speak. Morales kept replaying the radio transmission, analyzing every frequency spike, searching for a rational explanation that never came. At 6 a.m., additional search units arrived, fresh faces, unaware of what the first team had witnessed. They carried thermal drones, dogs, and mapping gear. The goal was simple: sweep the ridge and surrounding forest, locate any trace of Vale or Grady. Reyes forced himself into command mode, his voice calm but eyes bloodshot. "We proceed with caution," he said. "We stay within line of sight at all times. No one wanders alone. Understood?" The group nodded. But as they moved higher into the ridges, visibility dropped to nearly zero. The fog clung to their faces, muffling sound. Even the dogs grew restless, whining and refusing to move forward. By midday, they found the remains of what looked like an old ranger outpost, a collapsed wooden structure buried under snow and moss. Morales brushed the frost off a sign barely hanging from one hinge. The words were almost illegible. Station 11, closed, since 1996. Inside, the air was stale. Old coffee tins, a rusted stove, and paper logs turned to pulp by moisture. Reyes picked up a half-torn report pinned under a stone. The ink had bled, but a few lines were readable. Local reports of strange lights near the ravine, multiple hikers missing. Last signal recorded near Site B, distortions in... The rest was unreadable. "Captain," Jessup called from the corner, "you'll want to see this." There, in the dust, were several overlapping boot prints, some old, some new. And beside them, pressed into the floorboards, a bare footprint, human-sized but wrong. The toes were elongated, spread too far apart. Reyes swallowed hard. Bag the area. Let's move out. But outside, something was off. The compass needles spun slowly, refusing to settle. The GPS units blinked no signal. The temperature dropped abruptly, breath turning to fog in front of their faces. "Captain," Morales whispered, "we're not alone." A crack echoed through the trees, like a branch snapping, but heavier, closer. The team froze. Through the fog, a silhouette moved between the pines, tall and slow. For a moment, it seemed to be watching them. Then it stepped back into the mist and vanished. Reyes tried to rationalize it. "Could be another search group," he said, though even he didn't believe it. They called out, but there was no response. The radios hissed with a faint echo, their own voices replaying back at them, slightly delayed, distorted. Hours passed. They found the remnants of a campsite, torn tent fabric, a burnt patch of earth. Inside the ashes lay a melted camera battery. Morales examined it, frowning. "This isn't Aaron's model," she said. "It's older." Jessup found the camera itself, half buried nearby. The casing was cracked, lens shattered, but the memory card was intact. Morales pocketed it. "We'll check it back at base." They decided to descend before nightfall, but the mountain had other plans. The fog thickened, turning the world to shifting gray. GPS still dead. Reyes ordered flares, their orange glow cutting through the mist, but the light reflected strangely, bouncing off invisible shapes in the distance. Then came the sound. It started low, like wind, but soon turned rhythmic. Footsteps. More than one pair circling them. The dogs began barking wildly, then one yelped and went silent. "Eyes up!" Reyes shouted. Flashlights swept the trees. Nothing. But then Morales saw it, near the tree line, a figure standing perfectly still, too far to identify, but unmistakably human. She raised her light, but when the beam hit it, the figure moved. Not stepped, shifted. One instant it was there, the next a few meters closer, like it had skipped the space between. "Captain," she gasped. "It's—" Before she could finish, the radios screamed again, drowning out her voice. The same distorted phrase echoed, "You shouldn't have come back." The figure turned and disappeared into the fog. Reyes signaled retreat, his heart hammering. The group moved fast, half running, half sliding down the slope. But something followed, the crunch of snow always a beat behind their own steps. They reached the base at dusk, shaken and exhausted. Morales immediately loaded the memory card into her laptop. The footage flickered, a group of hikers, laughing, setting up camp. The timestamp read March 2010. As they scrolled through, the mood of the video changed. The laughter stopped. One of the men turned his camera toward the ridge. "Do you see that?" he asked. The frame showed a faint light moving through the trees, a bright white orb gliding silently, pulsing like a heartbeat. Then the image jolted violently, screams, running. The camera fell, capturing only the snow and boots scrambling. Finally, the lens turned upward. A figure loomed over the fallen hiker. It looked almost human, except the proportions were wrong. Too tall, limbs slightly bent in the wrong direction. The frame cut to black. Morales removed her headphones slowly. "This was filmed 15 years ago," she said, "right before 3 hikers went missing in this same area." Reyes leaned against the table, his knuckles white. "Whatever's out there, it's been here a long time." Outside, the fog pressed against the windows like a living thing. The wind began to rise, and through the static of the comms, just for a moment, came a whisper that froze everyone in place. "He's watching." The voice was Aaron Vales, but the coordinates displayed on the signal tracker didn't point to the ridge. They pointed directly to their camp. Morales turned to Reyes, her face drained of all color. "Sir, he's calling from here." Reyes looked toward the tree line, the darkness just beyond the glow of their lamps. The snow was still untouched. The radios hissed once more, and this time, through the interference, a second voice joined Aaron's. Low, guttural, almost mocking. "You found me." And from the forest, something answered, a single sharp crack like bones snapping in the cold. Then silence. The mountain went still again, as if it had been holding its breath all along. The next morning, Sarah couldn't shake off what she'd heard during the night. That faint, almost pleading voice embedded within the static. It had been so brief she wasn't even sure if it was real, but something about it haunted her. When she played the recording again on her laptop, the static roared like a blizzard. Then, for a split second, a male voice. "Can you hear me?" Then nothing. The voice was distorted, stretched by the poor reception, but there was no doubt. It was Evans. She froze. Every hair on her body stood on end. The timestamp on the recording showed it had been captured at 3:13 a.m., long after his disappearance. She looked again at the map overlay. It placed the signal somewhere deep in the western ridge, near a section known as the Devil's Staircase, a stretch of uneven rock formations that even experienced climbers avoided. Sarah grabbed her jacket and ran to the ranger station. "Where's Mason?" she asked the first officer she saw. "He left before dawn, said he had to check something near the ridge," the officer replied, barely looking up from his coffee. She froze. "The western ridge?" "Yeah, that's the one." Her stomach dropped. Mason hadn't mentioned that area last night. Why would he go there alone? And why now, the morning after that strange transmission? She drove up the trailhead in silence, the mist hanging low and thick. The forest was eerily quiet, not even birdsong. Every few minutes her radio crackled with static. At one point she thought she heard that same faint voice again. "Sarah." Her hands trembled on the wheel. When she reached the end of the access road, Mason's vehicle was already there, parked crookedly, door half open. "Mason," she called out, stepping cautiously from her truck. No response. The air smelled like rain and cold metal. She grabbed her flashlight and followed a set of boot prints that led into the trees. For a while, it was just the sound of her boots crunching on gravel. Then she noticed something. Another set of prints had appeared alongside his. Barefoot ones. Her flashlight beam trembled as she followed them. They were human, definitely, but the spacing was off. Too far apart, as if whoever made them had moved unnaturally fast or with an odd gait. The two sets led her deeper into the forest, twisting through dense pines until she reached a small clearing. There she saw it, Mason's radio lying in the dirt, still crackling. "Mason!" she shouted again. Then, through the static, she heard breathing. Slow, labored, and a voice, faint but close. "Help! Me!" It was him. She spun around, flashlight sweeping through the darkness. The beam caught on a figure standing between two trees, motionless. "Mason." The figure didn't move. Her pulse raced. She stepped closer, the beam steadying on his face. Or what she thought was his face. It was Mason's jacket, yes, but the man wearing it wasn't moving right. His head tilted unnaturally to one side, his mouth slack, eyes unfocused. He looked at her for a long, chilling second, then blinked, and bolted into the woods with impossible speed. Sarah froze in shock, then instinct took over. She ran after him, stumbling over roots, the light bouncing wildly. She could still hear the radio static echoing in her pocket. It was louder now, mixed with those distorted words. "Don't follow." She ignored it. The trail ended abruptly at a cliffside overlooking the valley. The wind howled. The figure was nowhere to be seen, just Mason's badge lying near the edge. She picked it up, her breath clouding the air. Then, from somewhere below, came a sound that didn't belong in this world, a low, rumbling moan that rose into a pitch like metal scraping stone. It seemed to vibrate through the rock beneath her. Sarah backed away slowly, every instinct screaming at her to leave. She turned and ran back toward the vehicles, branches slapping her arms, lungs burning. When she finally reached the trailhead, her truck's headlights flickered on by themselves. She hadn't left them on. Inside, her radio was hissing again. Then, Evan's voice. Clear this time, calm, almost serene. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah." Her blood ran cold. The recording ended with a burst of static. And then, nothing. She sat there, frozen in the driver's seat, staring into the fog that surrounded the road. Something had happened in those woods. Mason was gone, just like Evan. And now the mountain was calling her by name. The morning after Mason vanished, the mountain was silent. No helicopters, no search dogs, just fog and the slow hiss of rain against the windshield of Sarah's truck. She hadn't slept. Mason's voice, or whatever had used it, still echoed in her head. "You shouldn't have come here, Sarah." She sat motionless, clutching his badge in her hand. Her phone had no signal. The radio, when turned on, produced the same faint static she'd come to dread, and underneath it, something rhythmic. Not speech this time, but a pattern. She hit record. When she slowed the audio down, she realized it wasn't random interference. It was coordinates. A set of repeating numbers, encoded in Morse. She traced them on the map. The location was only a few miles north, deep inside an area locals called Whisper Hollow. It wasn't on any official hiking trail, but old topo maps marked it with faded ink. A narrow canyon with no marked entry, surrounded by vertical cliffs. The kind of place you'd only reach if you were looking for it. And apparently, Evan had been looking for it. Sarah's hands trembled as she packed her gear. She grabbed a camera, the recorder, a flare gun, and Mason's radio, the one that had broadcast his last breath. The weather was worsening, clouds rolling low over the peaks like bruised smoke. She parked near the base of the canyon and started climbing. The trail was steep and narrow. Every few minutes she caught glimpses of things that shouldn't have been there. Bits of fabric snagged on branches, a torn shoelace, a bent carabiner. Like breadcrumbs leading her deeper into the mountain's throat. After nearly 2 hours of hiking, she reached a flat ridge overlooking the hollow. What she saw made her stop breathing. Below her, in the clearing, stood a campsite. At first glance, it looked recent, tents still upright, a small fire pit ringed with stones. But as she descended, she realized the truth. The tents were shredded, the fabric stiff and bleached from exposure. Coffee cups still stood half full beside cold stoves, filled not with liquid but dust. Inside one tent, a sleeping bag lay open, and inside, bones, neatly arranged as if whoever had died there had been placed deliberately. The air was heavy, metallic. She tried the radio again. "Mason, this is Sarah. Do you copy?" Static. Then a faint reply, not from Mason. "You found it." Her knees nearly gave out. The voice was Evan's again, but slower this time, distant as if coming from underground. "You shouldn't be here. It doesn't like the light." Sarah turned in a slow circle, the hairs on her neck rising. "Who's it?" "Evan, what's going on?" No reply. The wind picked up, carrying a deep hum that seemed to rise from beneath her feet. She crouched near the fire pit and brushed away ash, revealing something carved into the stone, a spiral, jagged and uneven. The same spiral she'd seen sketched in Evan's old notebook when she'd looked through his case file days before. She took a photo. Then, without warning, the ground beneath her shuddered, not like an earthquake, but as if something shifted below. The air temperature dropped sharply. Her breath turned white. The radio crackled again, violently now, and through the static came a chorus of whispers, dozens of voices overlapping. "Down here. Follow. It's waiting." She stumbled backward, nearly falling into the fire pit. The soil there had turned dark, damp, almost like fresh mud. Then she saw it. A footprint. Not human. The heel was narrow, the arch impossibly long. Claw marks extended from the toes, deep enough to gouge stone. The print was fresh. Sarah turned and ran, climbing toward the ridge. But halfway up, she heard movement, fast, rhythmic, closing in. She spun around, flashlight trembling. Something was coming through the hollow. Not walking, crawling. Its outline flickered through the mist. Long limbs, too many joints, skin reflecting light like wet glass. She fired the flare gun instinctively. The red light illuminated the entire canyon for a second, and what she saw nearly stopped her heart. All along the rock walls were faces, dozens of them, human, half fused into the stone, their eyes open, mouths frozen mid-scream. The flare died, and the darkness swallowed everything again. Sarah ran. She didn't know how long. By the time she reached the truck, her throat burned and her hands were bleeding from the climb. She locked the doors, shaking uncontrollably, staring back toward the hollow. Then her phone buzzed once. No signal, but a single message notification. It was from Mason's number. "You can't save him. You'll only take his place." The screen flickered, then went black. Outside, through the fog, a light flickered near the tree line. Not bright like a flashlight, softer, almost like the glow of a campfire. For a moment, she thought she heard someone calling her name again. Sarah. She knew that voice. It was Evans, but he'd been gone for over a year, and this time, it sounded like he was standing right outside her window. Sarah barely slept that night. The image of the faces pressed into stone haunted her dreams. Every creak of the cabin, every rustle in the trees, sounded like footsteps or whispers, coaxing her back toward Whisper Hollow. She couldn't ignore it. Mason and Evan were out there somewhere, and something unnatural was waiting for anyone who dared step too close. At first light, she drove into town and called the Rangers. She told them everything: Mason's disappearance, Evan's last known coordinates, the campsite, the spirals in the stone, the faces in the hollow. The Rangers listened politely, jotting down notes, but the skepticism in their eyes was unmistakable. A single missing hiker? That happened all the time. Multiple disappearances. Unlikely. Without evidence. The truth sounded like a horror story. Still, Sarah insisted, she had the photos from the spiral carvings, the strange footprints, and the recordings from Evan's radio. Finally, the head ranger agreed to assemble a small search party. They returned to the hollow at dusk. 4 rangers, Sarah, and 1 local tracker named Briggs, whose instincts about the wilderness were nearly legendary. The fog hugged the canyon like a living thing. Sarah's stomach churned as she approached the same ridge she had climbed the day before. The wind whispered, low, mournful, warning. Briggs pointed to the footprint she had discovered. "Whatever made this, it's clever, and it's fast. Follow me." They moved carefully down into the hollow. Each step seemed to echo unnaturally, bouncing off the rock walls. The shredded tents, the coffee cups turned to dust, the bones arranged in the sleeping bag. It was all still there, unchanged. But the air had thickened, almost tangible. Every breath Sarah drew felt heavier, as if the canyon itself was alive, pressing against her chest. She examined the spiral again. Using the photos she had taken, she tried to piece together a pattern, something that would explain what had happened to Mason and Evan. The spirals were not random. They were symbols, ancient perhaps, etched to mark locations, rituals, or warnings. Briggs muttered under his breath, "This isn't natural. Not any sort of animal or human could do this. Whoever or whatever occupies this hollow has methods we don't understand." As night fell, the group set up a perimeter, but Sarah's eyes were drawn to the walls. Shadows shifted oddly, defying the light of their torches. Then faint whispers began again, distinct, overlapping voices. "Come back, join us, stay," one ranger shouted. Something moved behind a boulder. A shadow stretched, elongated, and impossible. Briggs aimed his flashlight, revealing the clawed footprints again. But these led straight up the rock face, disappearing as if gravity didn't apply. Sarah realized that Mason and Evan had not been taken horizontally. They had been drawn upward into the very cliffs themselves. Then Sarah found a clue that made her blood run cold. A tattered notebook wedged into a crevice, Evan's handwriting. The last entries described attempts to communicate, strange shapes following him, and voices in the wind that promised knowledge in exchange for obedience. The final line was smudged, torn. But she could read a fragment. "It's not done with us. The hollow feeds on fear and curiosity alike. Don't come looking, or you will." A sudden gust swept the hollow. The fog thickened, swallowing the Rangers' torches. Sarah felt an invisible pressure against her chest. The whispers crescendoed, angry now, frustrated. Briggs grabbed her arm. "We need to leave, now." They started climbing back to the ridge, but the hollow seemed to resist. Paths that had been there minutes ago vanished. Rocks shifted. A fallen tree blocked their way, though it had been stable before. Sarah's mind raced. The canyon itself was reacting, as if aware of their intrusion. From the corner of her eye, she glimpsed a figure on the ridge below, familiar silhouette hunched, motionless. Mason? No. Too thin, distorted. Then another, a shadow in the shape of Evan. They were watching, waiting, or worse, warning. Sarah realized the horrifying truth. The hollow wasn't just a place. It was a predator, ancient and patient, feeding on anyone who came close. Mason and Evan hadn't disappeared randomly. They had been claimed, transformed, their presence etched into the very stone, leaving behind whispers and warnings for the next intruder. The Rangers shouted as Sarah turned, stumbling over the path. The fog thinned momentarily, and she saw them clearly. Mason and Evan, impossibly still, partially fused into the rock, eyes open and pleading, faces frozen mid-scream. Her stomach lurched. We need to go," she whispered, voice trembling. Briggs nodded, pulling her along. The canyon resisted every step, but somehow they made it back to the ridge and finally the safety of the truck. Sarah looked back once. The fog swirled unnaturally, forming shapes, spirals, and faces in motion. Whispers followed her as she drove down the narrow mountain road, leaving the hollow behind. But deep inside her, she knew. The hollow remembered, and it would always be waiting. The drive back from Whisper Hollow was surreal. Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that her knuckles were white. Every mile down the winding mountain road felt like moving further away from a nightmare that would never truly end. The Rangers remained silent, each lost in their thoughts, the events replaying in their minds over and over. Even Briggs, usually calm and unshakable in the wilderness, looked pale and haunted. Back in town, the local authorities were skeptical at first. The story Sarah told seemed implausible. Spirals carved into stone walls, faces fused into cliffs, whispering voices carried on the wind. No solid evidence. Mason and Evan were still missing. The footprints that led up the cliffs had disappeared overnight, and the notebook, even though partially recovered, was smeared, almost deliberately obscured. They had recordings of faint whispers, but they could easily be dismissed as wind or echoes. Sarah felt frustration gnawing at her. "You don't understand," she told the sheriff. "We saw them, alive, sort of, trapped in the rock. It's not something you can ignore." The sheriff leaned back, tired. "Sarah, we can't keep launching searches every time someone sees something unusual in the mountains. We'll get lawsuits. We'll get men lost. We have to treat this as a missing persons case." But the whispers in Sarah's mind didn't stop. That night, she could still hear the faint voices, carried on the wind through the trees outside her window. Sometimes, when she stared at the hills in the distance, she swore she saw faint spirals etched into the cliffs, shimmering in the moonlight. Briggs returned to the hollow a week later, alone. Sarah begged him not to go, but he insisted he needed to confirm what he had seen. Hours passed. No word came back. Eventually, a search party found his truck parked at the trailhead, empty. No footprints leading to the hollow, no sign of struggle. Just the faint, almost imperceptible spirals carved into the ground where his boots had once pressed. The town began to whisper. Hikers spoke in hushed tones about the canyon that claimed men whole and the spirals that no one could understand. Some claimed that at night you could hear whispers carried on the wind, calling your name, promising knowledge or power for those who dared listen. Sarah tried to move on. She changed her job, her home, even her routine. Yet she could never completely escape the hollow. Dreams returned, faces pressed into stone, shadowy figures, the feeling of being watched. Sometimes she would wake with her heart racing, convinced that Mason or Evan were nearby, reaching out through the fog, waiting for someone to follow. Years passed. The authorities eventually closed the case, filing Mason and Evan as permanently missing. No body, no resolution, only the memory of a canyon that refused to release its victims. Sarah became a source of eerie fascination in online forums and documentaries about unexplained disappearances. Her story inspired warnings to hikers, cautionary tales whispered in mountain towns. Yet, despite everything, the hollow endured. On quiet nights when the wind was just right, faint spirals could still be seen on the cliffs, faint whispers audible to anyone who dared step too close. The canyon fed on fear, curiosity, and those who dared to intrude. Its victims, Mason, Evan, Briggs, their fates unknown, etched permanently into the stone, forever part of the hollow's enigma. Sarah never returned to the mountains, but she could never truly leave. Every call for help she heard on the news, every missing hiker reported, pulled at her memory. She knew the hollow waited patiently. It was not done, and it would claim again, slowly, methodically. The canyon was eternal, patient, and terrifyingly alive. And deep in the woods, beyond the reach of the nearest road, faint whispering could still be heard, spirals carved into the cliffs, faces pressed into the stone, calling to those who might come next. The story ended in silence, but not peace. The hollow remembered. It was patient. It would always wait.